is now Diaries of Abused Women, Story 5, which is titled Psychotic Father. I was raised in a small town in Central California where fruit and vegetables grew in abundance. My father was a field worker. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. Because my father didn't allow my mother to work nor to have any friends. When I was a child, we picked grapes, peaches, figs, and cotton to help with the bills because that was the way of my father. My father was a very abusive man. I can remember as far back as when I was 5 years old. I remember him beating my mother and hollering at her. I can remember him locking her up in their bedroom and how she screamed and cried as he slapped her and pushed her around. Then later that day when I saw her, she would be black and blue from head to feet. However, sadly, when I became older, I began to rebel against my father because I knew that what he was doing to us was wrong. Because sometimes when he became angry, he would beat us on a daily basis. Sometimes he would leave home. He didn't want any of us to see, talk, or to contact anyone. So he would padlock the doors from outside when he would leave, so we couldn't get out of the house because he had iron bars all around the windows and doors. Sometimes when he left home, he would take a yard rake and rake the dirt all around the yard. And if he came back home, and if he seen any shoe prints in the dirt around the house, anywhere, he would beat our mother because he was insanely jealous of our mother because she was a beautiful woman. Sadly, my mother stayed with him for over 25 years and took his abuse. She accepted this kind of treatment from him over and over again because she felt as though there were no way out. However, when I became 17 years old, I graduated from high school, and I told my mother that I was moving out of my father's house, that I was moving in with my girlfriend. Mama warned me not to let my father know this. She said just to walk away and don't come back. However, I told one of my younger brothers, and he told my father, and he beat me something terrible. However, as time passed by, I made a plan to get away from my father's house. Sometime late at night, when I thought my father was too drunk to hear anything, I would sneak outside and throw bags of my clothes over the fence to my girlfriend, and she would take them to her house. However, one day, my father had been drinking, and when he drank, he treated us better. So he allowed me to go to the store down the street, and I ran away and went to my girlfriend's house. And now I was 18 years old, and my father couldn't do anything about it. However, he accused my mother of encouraging me to move, and he beat her so bad until her face, neck, arms, and legs, and hands was black and blue. Days later, after this happened, I went to the middle school to see my baby brother, Johnny, and he told me what our father had done to our mother, and I became furious. He also told me that our father was now working more in the fields every day, and that he didn't come home until about 6 p.m. every day. So I went to our mother home. But when I seen the way she looked, it tore me up inside. Both of her eyes were black and blue, and her face had bruises all over it. She told me that he knocked her down to the floor and kicked her. Right then, I decided that I was going to end all of my mother's and siblings' pain and suffering once and for all. Suddenly, my mother's phone rang, and my brother answered it. When he hung up the phone, he told me that our father said that he would be home shortly. However, he was across town at the park where the farm workers gathered to get paid. I became furious, and my soul turned inside and out as I thought about how my mother looked. I went to my mother and wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly with tear-filled eyes. And the more that I thought of how my mother looked, I became even more furious. So I took my arms from around her, looking deeply into her eyes, and said, Mama, you will never have to go through any more beatings ever again. I promise you, Mama. And I stood there holding her tightly as she cried and cried. Suddenly my mind wandered as I remembered a gun that my father kept in the master bedroom under the bed in a box. And I took my arms from around my mother, sniffling, looking deeply into her eyes with sad eyes, and said, Don't worry, Mama. You won't ever have to go through any of this again. My mother looked at me with sad eyes and said, What do you mean by that, baby? I said, Oh, nothing, Mama. Mama, you know that I love you, don't you? She looked at me with loving eyes and said, Of course, baby. But now you better get on out of here because your father will be coming back soon. I said, Okay, Mama. But first, I need to go to the bathroom. My mother wiped away her tears with a handkerchief, and she rushed back into the kitchen and started back to cooking. I went to my parents' bedroom. I knelt down to my knees at the side of the bed and pulled the box from under the bed with the gun in it. I took the gun and 4 bullets from the box and loaded the gun and put it inside my purse. Then went back to the kitchen and said goodbye to my mother and brothers. And I quickly left my parents' house in my friend's car, and I drove across town to the park. When I arrived at the park, I parked the car to the side of the road and cut off the ignition, looking around the park for my father. I spotted him standing in a crowd of men talking. I picked my purse up from the passenger seat, took the gun from my purse, and threw my purse back to the seat. I got out of the car, closing the door, rushing across the park to where my father stood, talking to some men. I stopped near him and raised the gun up and shot him 3 times. And he fell to the ground holding his chest. Then 3 men rushed to me and took the gun from my hand, screaming, Lady, are you crazy? But I said nothing to them. I went closer to my father, to where he laid, looking down at him with angry eyes, and said, Father, you will never again hurt Mother or my brothers, ever again. My father took 2 short breaths, and he looked up at me, then closed his eyes and went to sleep. And as I stood there looking down at him, I had no remorse for what I had done. Somehow, as terrible as it was, I felt relieved. Suddenly, I was surrounded by 4 policemen. They handcuffed me and read me my rights, then put me in a police car and took me to jail. When my case came to court, it was proving that I, my mother, and my 2 siblings had been abused for years and years. I didn't have to spend any time in jail because my father, the man who's supposed to love me, had been raping me for years and abusing my mother and siblings. I managed to go on with my life. I became an attorney because I wanted to help abused women. So I opened a workshop telling abused women how to get away from abusive relationships. However, what happened to me, my mother, and my siblings will forever remain in the back of my mind, because no human being should have to ever go through abuse of any kind. Thank you.